The black mourning dress seemed to drink in the Arizona dust. As Delilah Owens stepped down from the stagecoach into Camp Verde, her veil trembling in the hot June wind of 1876. She carried a single carpet bag, and a heart so shattered that the pieces rattled inside her chest with every breath. A constant reminder that 3 months ago she had buried a husband she barely knew before their lives together could truly begin. Graham Wright stood near the general store watching the stage arrive as he did most Wednesdays, his worn hat shading eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. He had been waiting for her for 6 weeks, ever since the first letter arrived explaining the delay. The woman who stepped onto the dusty street was not what he had expected. She moved like a ghost, all draped in black crepe and grief so thick he could feel it from 20 paces away. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he drew near. "Miss Owens." She turned, and through the veil he could see eyes that had cried themselves empty. "Mr. Wright." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, as though speaking any louder might crack something vital inside her. "I received your letters," he said, feeling awkward with his hat in his hands, suddenly aware of how rough he must look after a morning of working cattle. "I am deeply sorry for your loss. Thank you." The words were automatic, polite, hollow. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of Camp Verde going about its business. A wagon rattled past. Someone laughed in the saloon across the street. Life continued despite the fact that Delilah's had stopped. "I have a room arranged for you at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house," Graham said carefully. "I thought perhaps you might want some time before we discussed anything else." Something flickered in her eyes then, something that might have been relief or gratitude. "That is very kind." He picked up her carpet bag, noting how light it was, how little she had brought to start this new life that she clearly had no heart for anymore. As they walked down the main street toward the boarding house, Graham kept a respectful distance. He had planned for many things when he had sent for a mail-order bride, but he had not planned for this. Mrs. Patterson was a round, motherly woman with silver hair and kind eyes who took one look at Delilah and immediately ushered her inside without the questions that clearly burned on her tongue. Graham set the bag down in the small but clean room and turned to leave. "Mr. Wright," Delilah said, and he paused at the door. "I understand if you no longer wish to honor our agreement. I would not blame you." He considered her standing there in all that black, looking like sorrow itself had taken human form. "Get some rest, Miss Owens. We can talk when you are ready." Over the next few days, Graham returned to his work on the ranch he co-owned with his brother, trying not to think too hard about the situation he found himself in. He had sent for a bride because at 32 years old, he was tired of being alone, tired of coming home to an empty house, tired of eating meals in silence. His brother Jack had married 2 years prior and now had a baby daughter, and watching their happiness had made Graham's own solitude seem heavier somehow. He had corresponded with Delilah for 4 months before she agreed to come west. Her letters had been intelligent, thoughtful, and cautiously optimistic. She had been a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, living with her aging parents. When they passed within months of each other the previous winter, she found herself alone and struggling to make ends meet on a teacher's salary. The prospect of marriage to a rancher in Arizona territory had seemed like a new beginning. But then her letters had stopped. For 2 weeks, there was nothing, and Graham had assumed she had changed her mind. Then came the black-edged envelope, the shaking handwriting explaining that she had met a merchant who courted her quickly and married her within a month. She apologized for the pain her change of heart must cause him, and that had been that, or so he had thought. 6 weeks later, another letter arrived. The merchant had been killed when his wagon overturned on a rain-slicked street. Delilah was a widow after barely 2 months of marriage. She had no one, nothing, and nowhere to go. If his offer still stood, she would come to Arizona, though she understood she was not the woman he had agreed to marry. That woman had died with her husband, she wrote, and she did not know if what remained would ever be whole again. Something in that raw honesty had moved Graham. He wrote back immediately, sent money for the journey, and told her to come. Now she was here, and he had no idea what to do with her. He saw her on Sunday at church, still dressed in full mourning, sitting in the back pew with Mrs. Patterson. She did not sing the hymns. She barely seemed to be present at all, her gaze fixed on some middle distance only she could see. After the service, several of the town's women approached her with the particular hunger of those who love tragedy that is not their own. Graham watched from across the churchyard as Delilah answered their questions with quiet courtesy, while slowly being drained of what little energy she possessed. He walked over, inserting himself into the conversation with an awkwardness that was unusual for him. "Miss Owens, would you care to take a walk? It is a pleasant morning." The gratitude in her eyes was worth the raised eyebrows from the church ladies. She took his offered arm with a feather-light touch, and they escaped down the street toward the edge of town where Verde Creek ran shallow and bright over smooth stones. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps and the rushing water. Finally, Delilah spoke. "You must think me very foolish. I do not think anything of the sort. I made promises to you, then broke them for a stranger, and now I have come crawling back because I have nowhere else to go." Her voice was flat, factual, devoid of self-pity. Graham stopped walking and turned to face her. "You fell in love. That is not foolish." I barely knew him. For the first time, emotion crept into her voice. "We had 5 weeks together as man and wife. 5 weeks, and yet I feel as though I have been hollowed out and will never be filled again. Love does not measure itself in time." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he could see the war being waged behind her eyes. The part of her that wanted to surrender to grief completely fighting against the part that insisted on survival. "What do you want from me, Mr. Wright?" "I can hardly cook. I have no energy for keeping house. I weep at odd moments for no reason at all. I am useless to you." "I want you to heal," he said simply. "Take whatever time you need. There is no obligation between us except what we choose to create. That is not fair to you. Let me decide what is fair to me." Something in her seemed to ease just slightly, like a rope that had been pulled too tight being allowed the smallest amount of slack. They walked a bit longer before he escorted her back to the boarding house, and he did not mention marriage again. June became July, and the Arizona heat pressed down on Camp Verde like a physical weight. Graham fell into a routine of visiting Delilah 3 times a week, always in public, always respectful. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch and he talked about the ranch while she listened without really hearing. Sometimes they simply existed in the same space, and that was enough. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about how he and Jack had come west after the war, looking for something they could not name. About how they had worked other men's cattle for years before finally scraping together enough to buy their own land. About the hard years of building the ranch into something profitable, something lasting. Delilah listened, and very gradually she began to speak as well. Small things at first. Comments about the weather, observations about the town. Then, slowly, fragments of her life before, her students in Philadelphia, her parents' final illnesses, the loneliness that had made her write to a stranger in Arizona territory. She did not speak of her late husband. That grief was still too raw, too immediate. August arrived with afternoon thunderstorms that turned the streets to mud and made the desert bloom in impossible colors. Graham brought Delilah books from his own small collection, knowing she had been a teacher, hoping they might provide some escape. She accepted them with quiet thanks and actually seemed to read them, because she would mention details during their visits. One particularly hot afternoon, he arrived at the boarding house to find her sitting on the porch with her veil finally lifted, her face bare to the world for the first time since her arrival. It was a face made for laughter, he thought, though it had forgotten how. High cheekbones, a generous mouth, dark blue eyes that must have sparkled once but now seemed faded like old denim left too long in the sun. The veil was too hot, she explained, a slight defensive note in her voice. "It is good to finally see you properly," Graham said, settling into the chair beside hers. They sat in silence for a while, watching the town. A group of children ran past, shrieking with laughter as they chased a dog. Delilah watched them with something almost like longing. "I wanted children," she said suddenly. "Thomas and I had planned for a family." It was the first time she had spoken her late husband's name aloud in Graham's presence. He waited, sensing there was more. "We had such plans. He was going to expand his business. We were going to buy a house with a garden. I was going to plant roses." Her voice broke just slightly on the last word. "Silly, foolish plans built on sand." "Not foolish," Graham said firmly, "just not meant to be. How do you bear it?" She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How do you make plans knowing that everything can be taken away in an instant?" "You make them anyway," he said, "because the alternative is not living at all." The tears spilled over then, tracking down her cheeks in silent streams. Graham reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. She gripped his fingers like a drowning person grips a rope, and they sat like that until the tears stopped and the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. September brought cooler temperatures and a question from Mrs. Patterson about how much longer Delilah would be staying. The boarding house was not a charity after all, and while she had been patient, there were other boarders who paid regularly and did not require special consideration. Graham paid another month's rent without being asked, but he knew this could not continue indefinitely. Delilah could not live in limbo forever, and neither could he. It was time for decisions to be made, one way or another. He asked her to visit the ranch on a Sunday afternoon, and she agreed with a nervousness that told him she understood this was significant somehow. He borrowed Jack's wagon, wanting to make the journey easier for her, and helped her up onto the seat beside him. The ride out of town took them along Verde Creek and then up into the rolling hills, where his cattle grazed on hardy desert grass. The ranch house came into view as they crested a rise, a simple but solid structure of wood and stone that he and Jack had built with their own hands. "It is not fancy," Graham said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is sturdy and it is mine." Delilah looked around at the land stretching out in all directions, the mountains rising in the distance, the vast sky overhead. "It is beautiful." He showed her the house, pointing out the main room with its large fireplace, the kitchen with its new cast iron stove, the 2 bedrooms. His words were careful, technical, as he explained how the property was divided, how he and Jack shared the herd but maintained separate households since Jack's marriage. "Why are you showing me this?" Delilah asked when they were back outside, standing in the yard with chickens pecking around their feet. Graham took a deep breath. "I am still willing to marry you if you will have me, but I need to know that you are choosing this life, not just accepting it because you have no other option." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I do not love you, I know. I do not know if I am capable of loving anyone again. I know that too. Then why would you want this? He considered how to put into words something he barely understood himself. Because I believe you are a good person who has had terrible luck. Because I think you could be happy here, given time. Because I would rather build something real slowly than continue as we are, both of us alone and pretending that is enough. And if I never love you, if I can only offer you companionship and nothing more, then that would be more than I have now, he said honestly. I am not asking you to pretend feelings you do not have, Delilah. I am asking if you would be willing to build a life with me, whatever that life may look like. She walked away from him, moving to the edge of the yard where she could look out over the land. He watched her shoulders rise and fall with deep breaths, watched her wrap her arms around herself, as though holding broken pieces together. When she turned back, her expression was clearer than he had seen it in all the months since her arrival. I need to tell you about Thomas, she said. About my late husband. You deserve to know what you are asking to take on. They sat on the porch steps and she spoke. She told him about meeting Thomas Cartwright in the street when she dropped her basket, and he helped her retrieve the scattered apples. About how he had sought her out after that, courting her with a gentle persistence that wore down her defenses. About how she had felt cherished for the first time in her life, seen as something precious rather than merely useful. I was so happy, she said, her voice breaking. For those few weeks, I was happier than I had ever been, and then he was just gone. One rainy morning, his wagon wheel caught in a rut, the whole thing overturned, and he struck his head on the cobblestones. He never woke up. Graham listened without interruption, letting her speak all the words that had been dammed up inside. I cannot promise you that kind of joy, she continued. I gave that to him and it died with him, but I can promise you honesty, loyalty, a genuine effort to be a good wife even if I am not a loving one. That is enough, Graham said. More than enough. You deserve better. I deserve what I choose, and I choose this. I choose you, Delilah, however you come. She searched his face as though looking for deception or hidden motives, but Graham had none to hide. He simply waited, patient as he had been since the day she arrived. Yes, she said finally. I will marry you. They were wed the following Saturday in a simple ceremony at the church with Jack and his wife Martha standing as witnesses. Delilah wore a gray dress, still in half mourning but no longer the full black. Graham wore his best suit and tried not to feel like he was taking advantage of a woman with no other choices. The reception afterward at Mrs. Patterson's was small and subdued. A few neighbors, some ranch hands, a cake that Martha had baked. Delilah was polite, gracious even, but Graham could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This was costing her, this performance of normalcy. When it was time to leave for the ranch, he loaded her few possessions into the wagon and helped her up beside him. The ride was silent, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and pinks that neither of them remarked upon. At the house, he carried her bags inside and set them in the bedroom. This will be your room, he said. I will sleep in the other. She looked at him with surprise. That is not necessary. We are married. We are married in law, Graham agreed. But I meant what I said. I will not demand what you are not willing to give. Something shifted in her expression, some tightness easing. Thank you. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Delilah took over the household tasks, not because Graham demanded it, but because, as she said, she needed to feel useful. She cooked simple meals, kept the house clean, tended the chickens and the kitchen garden that had been neglected since Graham lived alone. He worked the ranch, often leaving before dawn and not returning until dusk. In the evenings they ate together, sometimes talking, sometimes not. It was a quiet life, peaceful even, but Graham could feel the wall between them. Delilah was present in body, but her heart was still somewhere else. locked away with her dead husband. October arrived, and with it the roundup. A busy time when every hand was needed to gather the cattle and separate out those ready for market. Graham was gone long hours, coming home exhausted and dust-covered. Delilah would have water heated for washing and a late supper waiting. She asked questions about the work, seeming genuinely interested, and he found himself looking forward to those evening conversations more than he wanted to admit. One night he came home to find her standing in the yard, looking up at the stars that blazed overhead in the clear desert sky. He stopped beside her, following her gaze. "It is so vast here," she said quietly. "In Philadelphia, you could barely see the stars through the smoke and the buildings. Here they go on forever. Does it make you feel small?" "It makes me feel like my grief is small," she said. "Like perhaps it does not have to fill everything the way it has been." He did not respond, just stood beside her, and after a moment she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and the significance was not lost on either of them. They stood like that for a long time, hand in hand under the stars, not speaking because no words were needed. November brought the first real cold, frost glittering on the ground in the mornings and ice forming along the edges of the creek. Delilah began wearing a shawl constantly, unused to the desert cold after the moderate Philadelphia winters. Graham bought her a warmer coat on his next trip to town, and the look of surprised gratitude on her face told him how unused to being cared for she still was. Thanksgiving came, and Martha insisted they join her and Jack for dinner. It was a warm, noisy affair with baby Elizabeth demanding attention, and Jack telling terrible jokes that somehow still made everyone laugh. Graham watched Delilah across the table and saw something he had not seen before. She was smiling. Really smiling, not the polite expression she wore for strangers but genuine amusement. When they returned home that evening, she was quieter than usual. He wondered if the taste of normal family happiness had been painful, a reminder of what she had lost. "That was nice," she said as she prepared for bed. She left her bedroom door open now, a small intimacy that he treasured. "Your brother and Martha are very kind. They are good people. Elizabeth is beautiful. You must enjoy being an uncle." "I do." He paused, then decided to risk the question. "Do you still want children, Delilah?" She was silent for so long he thought he had overstepped. Then she said, "I do not know. I wanted them with Thomas. I do not know if I want them now when everything feels so uncertain." "There is no rush," he assured her. "I just wanted to know what you were thinking." "What are you thinking?" she asked, turning the question back on him. "I think I would like children someday," he said honestly. "But only if you want them too. Only if you are ready." She nodded slowly, processing this. "That is fair." December arrived with occasional snow that dusted the mountains and melted by midday in the valley. Christmas was coming, and Graham asked Delilah what she might like as a gift. "I do not need anything," she said. But he persisted until she admitted that she missed having books, that she had left her small collection behind in Philadelphia when she fled her grief. He rode into town the next day and spent an hour at the general store going through their limited selection. He finally chose 3 books, a volume of poetry, a novel by Charles Dickens, and a book about the natural history of the Arizona Territory. He wrapped them carefully in brown paper tied with string. On Christmas morning, he gave them to her over breakfast. She unwrapped them slowly, her fingers tracing the covers with something like reverence. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is very thoughtful. I know how you love to read." She looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but for once they seemed to be happy ones. "I have something for you as well." She disappeared into her room and emerged with a package of her own. Inside was a shirt she had sewn, the stitches small and even the fabric a sturdy cotton in a deep blue. "I noticed your good shirt was getting worn," she said, suddenly shy. "I hope it fits." He tried it on immediately, and it fit perfectly. She must have measured one of his other shirts to get the sizing right. The thought of her doing that, taking the time and care, moved him more than he could express. "It is perfect," he said. "Thank you, Delilah." They spent the rest of the day quietly, Delilah reading her poetry while Graham worked on mending a bridle that had broken. It was domestic and peaceful, and he felt something warm bloom in his chest at the rightness of it. January of 1877 brought bitter cold and a snowstorm that lasted 3 days, trapping them in the house together. Graham spent the time doing indoor chores while Delilah cooked and read. On the second day, she asked if he would read aloud to her while she did mending. He was not much of a reader, but he did his best with the Dickens novel. His voice stumbled over the longer words, and he knew his inflection was all wrong, but Delilah listened with what seemed like genuine pleasure. When he apologized for his poor reading, she shook her head. "You are doing fine. It is nice to hear another voice besides my own thoughts." That evening, as the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, they sat close to the fire for warmth. Delilah was darning socks, her needle flashing in the firelight when she spoke. "I am glad I came here, Graham. I did not think I would ever be able to say that, but I am." He looked up from the piece of leather he was tooling. "I am glad you came too. You have been very patient with me, more patient than I deserved. You deserved all the patience in the world." She set down her mending and turned to face him fully. "I need you to know that I am trying to heal, to be present in this life instead of dwelling in the past. It is harder than I expected." "Healing is not a straight line," he said. "Some days will be better than others." "Are you ever frustrated with me?" With this situation, he considered lying, giving her the easy comfort, but she had asked for honesty, and that was what he would give. "Sometimes I am lonely, even though you are here. But I do not regret this, Delilah, not for a moment." She moved then, crossing the small space between them and sitting beside him on the floor near the fireplace. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that made his breath catch. "Neither do I," she whispered. They sat like that until the fire burned low, and when they finally went to their separate beds, something had shifted between them. The wall was still there, but it was no longer insurmountable. February brought warmer days and the first hints of spring. Delilah began spending more time outside, walking the property and even helping Graham with some of the lighter ranch work. She learned to scatter feed for the chickens, to collect eggs, to recognize which plants were which in the kitchen garden. One afternoon she asked if he would teach her to ride. He was surprised but pleased, and he saddled the gentlest horse they owned, a bay mare named Honey. "She is very calm," he assured Delilah as he helped her mount. "Just hold the reins lightly and let her know what you want." Delilah was nervous at first, sitting stiffly in the saddle, but gradually she relaxed. Graham led Honey around the yard, then out into the nearby field, always staying close. By the end of the hour, Delilah was smiling with genuine delight. "This is wonderful," she called down to him. "I feel so free." He could not help but smile back. This was the most animated he had seen her since her arrival, and it did something to his heart to know he had helped put that joy in her face. They made riding a regular activity after that. At first, Graham stayed beside her, but soon Delilah was confident enough to ride on her own, though never far from the house. She would come back wind-blown and flushed, more alive than he had ever seen her. March arrived, and with it the anniversary of her late husband's death. Graham had been dreading it, unsure how Delilah would react, but when the day came she was quiet but not devastated. She spent the morning alone in her room, and he gave her the space she needed. At midday, she emerged and asked if he would walk with her. They went down to the creek, where the water ran high with snowmelt, and she stood looking into the current for a long time. "A year ago today, my life ended," she said. "Or at least, I thought it did. I wanted to die too, did you know that? I could not see any reason to continue." Graham's chest tightened at the pain in her voice, but he let her speak. "But I did continue. I got on a stage and traveled across the country to marry a stranger. I learned to live in a desert. I learned to ride a horse and cook over a wood stove and 100 other things I never imagined doing." She turned to look at him. "I learned that maybe my life was not over after all. I am very glad it was not," he said softly. "So am I." She reached for his hand and he took it, their fingers intertwining with an ease born of practice. "Thank you for waiting for me, Graham. For not giving up on me when I was giving up on myself. I would wait as long as you needed. I know. That is what makes you remarkable." They stood by the creek until the sun began to sink, and when they walked back to the house, Delilah did not let go of his hand. That night, she left her bedroom door open wider than usual, and Graham thought perhaps the wall between them had a door now, one that was slowly opening. April brought wildflowers blooming across the desert in carpets of yellow and purple and red. Delilah was enchanted by them, picking bouquets for the house until every surface held a jar of blooms. Graham watched her arrange them with care, her face soft with concentration, and realized with sudden clarity that he had fallen in love with his wife. It was not the desperate passion he had felt in his youth for girls who barely knew his name. It was something deeper, rooted in the quiet moments they had shared, the gradual building of trust and companionship. He loved her resilience, her determination to heal despite the weight of her grief. He loved the way she hummed while cooking, the way she spoke gently to the animals, the way she had slowly opened up to this life he offered. He said nothing about this realization. She had been clear about her own feelings or lack thereof, and he would not burden her with his own. But it changed things for him, colored every interaction with a new tenderness. May arrived hot and dry, and with it came a crisis. One of the ranch hands was thrown from his horse and broke his leg badly. Graham was gone for 2 days, taking the man into Prescott where there was a doctor who could set the bone properly. When he returned, exhausted and worried about the hand's recovery, he found Delilah waiting up for him despite the late hour. She had hot food ready and water for washing, and she fussed over him in a way she never had before, insisting he eat and tell her everything that had happened. When he finally collapsed into a chair, too tired to even remove his boots, she knelt and did it for him, her hands gentle but efficient. "You are dead on your feet," she said. "Go to bed, Graham. Everything else can wait." He caught her hand as she stood, pulling her gaze to his. "Thank you for waiting up. You did not have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. "I was worried about you." Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition of feeling that went beyond simple friendship or even affection. Graham saw it in her eyes, the surprise at her own words, at the realization that somewhere along the way she had started to care for him as more than just the man who had offered her refuge. She did not pull her hand away, and he did not let go. They stood like that in the dim kitchen, the lantern flickering on the table, both of them suddenly aware that something was changing. "Delilah," he said softly, her name a question. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. You do not have to feel anything you are not ready for." "But what if I am ready? What if I have been ready for weeks now but was too afraid to admit it?" Her voice shook slightly. "What if I am terrified of caring for someone again because I know how much it hurts to lose them?" "You might lose me," he acknowledged. "Life offers no guarantees. But you might also have years of happiness. Decades even. Is the fear worth missing that? She thought about it, really thought, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she stepped closer to him, so close he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes, and she placed her free hand on his chest over his heart. "Teach me to be brave," she said. "Teach me how to love again." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You are already the bravest person I know." When he kissed her, it was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. She answered by leaning into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as though anchoring herself. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Delilah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am not crying because I am sad," she said quickly. "I am crying because I did not think I could feel this way again. Happy, hopeful, alive." "You are very much alive," Graham said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the most alive thing I have ever known." She laughed then, a real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, and the sound of it made Graham's heart soar. She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. "Stay with me tonight," she said when they broke apart. "Not in separate rooms. Stay with me." "Are you certain?" "I am certain that I want to be your wife in every way," she said firmly. "I am certain that I am tired of being afraid. I am certain that I want you." He kissed her again by way of answer and then swept her up into his arms, carrying her to her bedroom. Their bedroom, he corrected himself. From now on, it would be their bedroom. They made love slowly, tenderly, taking time to learn each other. Delilah cried again afterward, but they were good tears, healing tears, and Graham held her until they stopped. They talked deep into the night, the words coming easier now, the last of the walls crumbling. She told him that she had been falling for him for months but had not wanted to admit it, had not wanted to betray Thomas's memory. He told her that she was not betraying anyone, that Thomas would have wanted her to be happy. She told him that she believed that now, that she was ready to live again fully instead of just existing. When they finally slept, it was tangled together, Delilah's head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders, and Graham thought he had never known such contentment. June arrived, and with it the first anniversary of Delilah's arrival in Camp Verde. She marked it by wearing a dress in pale green, the morning finally set aside completely. They rode out together to a high point on the ranch where they could see the valley spread below them, and she talked about the future for the first time. "I want to expand the garden," she said. "Grow more vegetables, maybe some fruit trees if they will survive here. I want to learn to can and preserve so we have food through the winter. I want to make this house a real home." "It is already a home," Graham said. "You made it that. Our home," she corrected. "Not just yours or mine. Ours." "Ours," he agreed, liking the sound of it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think I am ready to talk about children, not immediately, but someday. I want a family with you, Graham." His heart felt too large for his chest. "I want that too, very much." "I will probably be a nervous mother," she warned, "always worrying that something will happen." "Then I will be calm enough for both of us," he promised. "We will balance each other." She smiled at that and leaned into his side. "Yes, I think we will." July brought scorching heat and a surprise visitor. A letter arrived from Philadelphia, forwarded from Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. It was from Thomas's sister, whom Delilah had met only once. The woman wrote that she had been going through Thomas's effects and found letters from Delilah, letters written during their brief courtship. She thought Delilah might want them back, as they were very personal. Delilah read the letter twice, her face unreadable, and then set it aside. "Do you want them?" Graham asked carefully. "We could send for them." She considered it, then shook her head. "No, those letters were written by a different person to a different life. I do not need them anymore." You are certain, I am certain. She took his hand. Thomas will always be part of my past, part of what made me who I am. But you are my present and my future, Graham. I do not need old letters to remember what we had. It is enough that I lived it. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I love you, Delilah. I probably should have said it before now. Her eyes widened, then softened. I love you too. I have for a while, I think. I was just too stubborn to admit it. When did you know? I think it was the day you taught me to ride, she said thoughtfully. The way you were so patient, so careful to make sure I felt safe. Or maybe it was before that, the night we sat under the stars. Or maybe it was 100 small moments all adding up to one truth. You are a good man, Graham Wright, and I am very lucky to have found you. I am the lucky one. We are both lucky, she said firmly. Now kiss me before I get maudlin. He did, and it was sweet and perfect and everything he had never dared hope for. August brought news that Martha was expecting another child, and Delilah threw herself into preparing for the baby with an enthusiasm that told Graham she was, indeed, ready for a family of their own. She sewed tiny clothes and knitted blankets, her hands always busy. One evening, as she worked on a particularly intricate booty, she said casually, I think I might be pregnant. Graham, who had been reading the newspaper, dropped it immediately. You think? I am fairly certain, actually. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling odd in the mornings. She looked up at him with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. How do you feel about that? He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. I feel like the luckiest man in Arizona territory, in the whole country, in the world. She laughed and held him tight. I am a little scared, she admitted, but mostly I am happy, so very happy. They told Jack and Martha the next Sunday, and Martha cried and hugged Delilah so hard Graham worried for the baby. Jack clapped him on the back and made jokes about their children growing up together, and it was all exactly right. September brought cooler temperatures and the confirmation from a doctor in Prescott that Delilah was indeed expecting, due sometime in early March. She bloomed with pregnancy, her skin glowing and her energy returning in ways Graham had never seen before. She sang while she worked, laughed easily, and touched him often, as though reassuring herself that he was real. They spent hours planning for the baby, discussing names and where the cradle should go, and how they would manage the ranch work once the child arrived. Graham found himself unable to stop smiling, unable to believe that this was his life now. October brought the roundup again, and Delilah insisted on helping despite her condition, at least with the lighter tasks. She cooked for the ranch hands, kept track of the tallies, and generally made herself indispensable. The men treated her with a respect and affection that made Graham proud. She had become part of the fabric of the ranch, as essential as water or grass. One evening during roundup, as they sat around the fire with the hands eating supper, one of the older cowboys asked Delilah how she liked Arizona compared to Philadelphia. She thought about it for a long moment, her hand resting on her barely rounded belly. Philadelphia was my past, she said finally. It was where I learned who I could be, but Arizona is my future. It is where I learned who I want to be. And who is that? The cowboy asked. She looked at Graham and her smile was brilliant. Happy. I want to be happy, and here I am. November brought Thanksgiving again, this time with both Martha and Delilah pregnant, comparing symptoms and laughing about their expanding waistlines. Elizabeth was walking now, getting into everything, and Delilah played with her with a patience and joy that made Graham certain she would be an excellent mother. As they drove home that evening, Delilah said, I hope we have a boy first, a son to help you with the ranch. "I will be happy with whatever we have as long as you are both healthy," Graham said. "I know. But still, I hope for a boy. We can name him after your father." Graham's father had died when he was young, and the gesture touched him deeply. "George, you would want to name him George." "If you would like that." "I would like that very much." She took his hand and squeezed. "Then George it is if we have a boy, and if we have a girl, whatever you want." "Diana, I think. It was my mother's name." "Delilah Wright," he said, testing it. "That is beautiful." December came, and with it the Christmas season again. Delilah was 5 months along now, starting to show properly, and Graham found himself constantly amazed that she was carrying his child. Their child. A whole person that they had created together. She made him another shirt for Christmas, and he gave her a rocking chair he had spent weeks building in the barn when she was not around. She cried when she saw it, her hands running over the smooth wood. "It is perfect," she said. "I will rock our baby in this chair and tell them about how patient their father was, how he waited for me to heal and never complained. I will tell them about how brave their mother was," Graham said, "how she crossed a country and rebuilt her life from nothing." "We will both tell them how much they are loved," Delilah said firmly, "from the moment they were conceived." "From before that," Graham corrected. "I loved this baby before I even knew they existed because they are part of you." She kissed him then, long and deep, and when they broke apart she said, "I am so grateful the stage brought me here. I am so grateful for every moment that led me to you. Even the painful ones, even those," she said, "because they made this possible. They made me who I am, and that person is someone who can appreciate what we have." January of 1878 brought cold and rain, and Delilah grew more uncomfortable as the baby grew larger. She had trouble sleeping, trouble getting comfortable, and Graham did everything he could to help. He massaged her swollen feet, brought her extra pillows, and listened to her complaints without judgment. "I am enormous," she moaned one evening. "I am a whale, a beached whale in the middle of the desert." "You are beautiful," he said, and he meant it. She had never looked more lovely to him, glowing with life and health and the baby they had made together. "You are required to say that. You are my husband. I am saying it because it is true." She looked at him with suspicion, then softened. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything good in the world." February arrived, and with it a letter from Philadelphia, but this time it brought good news. One of Delilah's former students had written to tell her that she had become a teacher herself, inspired by Delilah's kindness and patience. The letter was full of gratitude and affection, and Delilah cried happy tears over it. "I did not think I made a difference," she said. "I was just a teacher." "You were never just anything," Graham said firmly. "You touch lives, Delilah. You always have." "I want to make a difference here too," she said. "Maybe when the baby is older, I could teach some of the ranch children their letters. There is no school close enough for many of them. I think that is a wonderful idea." She smiled and placed his hand on her belly where the baby was kicking. "Feel that? They agree." Graham felt his child moving under his palm and thought his heart might burst from the fullness of it. How had he gotten so lucky? How had this sad, broken woman who stepped off the stage in mourning clothes become this vibrant, loving person who filled his life with joy? March arrived with Delilah enormous and uncomfortable, and insisting that the baby was never going to come. But then, on a bright morning with the first spring flowers blooming, her water broke while she was feeding the chickens. Graham, who had been practicing staying calm, promptly panicked. He rushed her inside, sent one of the hands for the midwife in town, and tried to remember everything he was supposed to do. Delilah, despite being in labor, was the calm one. "It is fine," she kept saying. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am fine." She was not fine. Labor was hard and long and painful. Graham stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand when she needed it, giving her space when she needed that instead. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, directed everything with calm efficiency. After 14 hours, as the sun was setting, George Thomas Wright made his entrance into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the entire situation. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the baby on Delilah's chest, and Graham watched his wife's face transform with wonder and love. She touched their son's tiny fingers, his dark hair, his perfect little face, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "Hello, George," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Graham could not speak past the lump in his throat. He touched his son's hand and felt the tiny fingers curl around his own, and he was lost, completely and utterly lost to this perfect little person. "He is beautiful," he finally managed. "He looks like you," Delilah said, smiling. "Poor thing." "He looks like his mother," Graham countered. "Lucky child." Mrs. Chen finished her work and left them alone with their son. Delilah nursed him for the first time, and Graham watched in awe as his wife and child figured out this new dance together. "I cannot believe he is here," Delilah said softly. "I cannot believe we made him." "We did," Graham said. "You did. You are amazing." "I love him so much already," she said, her voice breaking. "I did not know it was possible to love someone this much this quickly." "I know exactly what you mean." They spent hours just watching George sleep, marveling at every tiny feature, every small noise he made. Finally, Delilah fell asleep with the baby in her arms, and Graham carefully moved them both to make sure they were comfortable. He sat in the rocking chair he had made and watched his family sleep, and he thought about the journey that had brought them here. The letters, the waiting, the woman in mourning stepping off the stage, the slow, careful building of trust and then love. It had not been easy. There had been pain and grief and moments when he thought she might never heal. But she had, in her own time and her own way, and she had brought him into her healing. Now here they were, a family. Not the family either of them had planned, but the family they had built together from patience and hope and a willingness to try. The weeks after George's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, and learning how to care for a tiny human who had very loud opinions about everything. Graham helped as much as he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with the baby when Delilah needed sleep. Martha came to visit with baby Elizabeth, and the two women compared notes and laughed about the chaos of new motherhood. Jack came by to meet his nephew and pronounced him a fine boy who would make an excellent rancher someday. As the spring wore on, George grew and changed, becoming more alert, more interested in the world around him. Delilah was a natural mother, patient and loving even when she was exhausted. Graham watched her with their son and fell in love with her all over again every single day. One evening in early May, after George had finally fallen asleep in his cradle, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Delilah leaned against Graham's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her. "You remember what I said the day you proposed?" she asked. "About how I did not love you and might never be able to, I remember." "I was so wrong," she said softly. "I did not think I could ever love anyone again, and now I cannot imagine my life without you, without this." She gestured to the ranch, the house, the cradle just visible through the open door. "You were not wrong," Graham said. "You were just not ready yet. There is a difference. You waited anyway. I would have waited forever." She turned to look up at him, her eyes bright in the fading light. "I am so happy, Graham, happier than I ever thought I could be. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for giving us a chance." She kissed him then, sweet and slow, a promise of all the years to come. When she pulled back, she said, "I want more children, at least 2 or 3 more." I want to fill this house with noise and love and chaos," he laughed. "Then that is what we will do. And I want to start that school I mentioned, teach the ranch children, make a difference here the way I used to in Philadelphia. We can build a schoolhouse," he said. "Nothing fancy, but good enough. We have the land and the lumber." Her face lit up. "Really? You would do that?" "I would do anything for you, you know that." "I do know that," she said, "and I love you for it. I love you for so many reasons I could not even list them all." "Try anyway," he teased. So she did, listing all the things she loved about him as the stars came out overhead. His patience, his kindness, his quiet strength. The way he held their son like he was made of glass. The way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The way he had waited for her heart to mend instead of demanding she be whole before he could love her. When she finally ran out of words, he kissed her again and told her all the things he loved about her. Her resilience, her courage, her capacity for love even after loss. The way she hummed while cooking. The way she made the house a home just by being in it. The way she had chosen to live instead of just surviving. They sat on that porch until long after dark, holding each other and talking about their future. More children, the school, growing old together on this land they both loved. It was a beautiful future, full of hope and promise, and neither of them took it for granted. They knew better than most how quickly things could change, how fragile life could be. But they also knew that the risk of loss was worth the joy of love, that building something together was worth the fear that it might fall apart. Summer arrived hot and bright, and baby George grew strong and healthy. Delilah slowly regained her strength and started making plans for the school in earnest. She talked to the neighboring families, gauged interest, and began collecting books and supplies. By the time George was 6 months old, they were ready to build. Graham and Jack and the ranch hands worked on the small schoolhouse whenever they had free time, and by autumn, it was complete. A simple one-room building with benches and a wood stove and a blackboard that Jack had brought from Prescott. Delilah opened the school in October with 6 students ranging in age from 5 to 12. She taught them reading and writing and arithmetic, and she loved every moment of it. Graham would sometimes stop by during the day and watch her through the window, her face animated as she explained something to the children, and he would marvel at how far they had both come. The first year of George's life flew by, and before they knew it, they were celebrating his first birthday with cake and presents, and both families gathered around. George smashed cake all over his face and laughed with delight, and Delilah looked at Graham across the table with such love that it took his breath away. That night, after everyone had gone home and George was asleep, Delilah told Graham she was pregnant again. Already? He asked, surprised but delighted. "Apparently we are very good at making babies," she said with a laugh. "This one should arrive next summer." He pulled her close and kissed her soundly. "I love our life," he said. "I love you, I love our son, I love everything about this." "So do I," she whispered. "More than I can ever say." The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Delilah knew what to expect, and she continued teaching almost until her due date. The children in her class made gifts for the new baby, tiny drawings and a blanket knitted together from scraps of yarn. Diana Grace Wright arrived on a hot July day in 1879, small and perfect with her mother's dark blue eyes. George, now 16 months old, was fascinated by his new sister and wanted to help with everything. With 2 children, life became even more chaotic and wonderful. Delilah managed the household and the school with the help of a young woman from town who came in a few days a week. Graham expanded the ranch, buying more land and more cattle, building something substantial to pass down to his children. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. In 1881, their third child arrived, another boy they named James. In 1883, a fourth child, a girl named Clara. Their house was never quiet, never still, always full of the noise and mess and joy of children. Delilah's school grew too, with more students every year as word spread about the quality of education she provided. She taught reading and writing, but also kindness and resilience, lessons she had learned herself through pain and loss. Graham watched his family grow and his ranch prosper, and he never stopped being grateful for the woman in mourning who had stepped off that stage so many years ago. She had changed his life in every way that mattered, had given him a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. On their 10th wedding anniversary, he took her back to the creek where they had walked the day after her first husband's death anniversary. The children were with Martha for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. "You remember standing here?" he asked. "You told me you thought your life had ended." "I remember," she said softly. "I was so lost then, so broken." "You are not broken now, no," she agreed. "I am whole. Different than I was before, maybe, scarred, but whole." "The scars are part of what makes you beautiful," he said. She turned to him, this woman who had become his whole world, and she smiled. "You have been saying that for 10 years. Do you ever tire of it?" "Never." "I will say it for the rest of my life if you will let me." "I will let you," she said. "In fact, I insist upon it." He pulled a small package from his pocket. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire the color of her eyes. "I never gave you a proper wedding ring," he said. "We married so quickly and you were not ready for such things, but I want you to have this now as a symbol of everything we have built together." She slipped it on her finger, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. You are perfect. This life is perfect." "It is not perfect," he corrected gently. "But it is ours, and that makes it exactly right." She kissed him then, there by the creek where she had once mourned her past, and she poured into that kiss all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her heart. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A bird called from the cottonwood tree overhead. Life continued in all its messy, beautiful glory. "I want to grow old with you," Delilah said. "I want to watch our children have children of their own. I want to teach until I cannot teach anymore. I want every single moment I can have with you." "Then that is what we will do," Graham promised. "Every single moment together." And they did. The years continued to pass, bringing joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, all the things that make a life rich and full. They faced it all together, hand in hand, building on the foundation of patience and love they had established in those early days when she was healing and he was waiting. George grew to be a strong young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to work it alongside his father. Diana became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in a nearby town. James went east for university and came back with new ideas about ranching that Graham was willing to try. Clara married a good man from Prescott and gave them their first grandchildren. Through it all, Graham and Delilah remained devoted to each other. They still took walks by the creek. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about their day. They still looked at each other with wonder sometimes, marveling at the life they had created. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Graham stood to make a toast. He was 57 now, gray at the temples, weathered by years of sun and wind. Delilah was 52, laugh lines around her eyes, her dark hair streaked with silver. 25 years ago, he said, a woman arrived in mourning and I waited for her heart to mend. What I did not know then was that in waiting for her, in loving her, my own heart would be healed in ways I did not even know I needed. Delilah, You have been my greatest adventure, my deepest love, and my truest friend. Here is to 25 more years, and then 25 after that. You are not getting rid of me that easily, Delilah said, laughing through tears. I plan to be around for a very long time, Graham Wright. Then I am the luckiest man who ever lived, he said, and he kissed her while their family cheered. They did have many more years together. They watched their children build their own lives and their grandchildren grow. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of the family they had created. They grew old together on the land they loved, their lives intertwined so completely that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. When Graham was 78, he fell ill with pneumonia. Delilah nursed him tirelessly, refusing to leave his side. Their children came to say goodbye, but Graham rallied, fighting his way back to health with the same stubborn determination he had shown in everything else. You are not leaving me yet, Delilah said fiercely, holding his hand. We have too much left to do. What is left to do? He asked, his voice weak but amused. We have done it all. We still have to see our great-grandchildren grow up. We still have to celebrate our 60th anniversary. We still have to take one more walk by the creek. So he fought, and he survived, and they did all those things and more. They made it to 60 years of marriage, a milestone marked with a huge celebration that brought people from all over the territory. At the party, one of their great-grandchildren asked Delilah the secret to a long and happy marriage. She looked at Graham, sitting in his chair with a lap full of babies, and she smiled. Patience, she said. Love is not always immediate. Sometimes it has to grow slowly, carefully, like a plant in the desert. You have to tend it, water it, protect it from the harsh sun. But if you are patient, if you give it time and care, it will bloom into something more beautiful than you can imagine. And choosing each other, Graham added from across the room. Every single day we choose each other. That is the real secret. They lived several more years, healthy and happy, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created. When the end finally came, they went peacefully, just months apart, having lived full and rich lives that touched everyone who knew them. At Graham's funeral, Delilah's children spoke of the love between their parents, how it had shaped them all, how it had shown them what was possible when 2 people chose to build something together. At Delilah's funeral, her students spoke of her kindness, her patience, her ability to see potential in everyone. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that shaded their graves from the harsh desert sun. Their headstone bore both their names and a single line: Love is patient. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The schoolhouse Delilah founded still stood, still teaching children to read and write and dream. The creek still ran clear and bright, whispering over the same stones where they had once stood together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was right, you could almost hear them there by the water, laughing together as they had for so many years. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. Their story became legend in Camp Verde, a tale told to young couples struggling through hard times. The patient cowboy who waited, the mourning bride who learned to love again. The life they built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one small act of love at a time. It was a story about second chances and healing hearts, about the courage it takes to try again after loss, about how love is not always thunder and lightning. Sometimes it is the steady, patient rain that brings the desert to bloom. And it was a story with a happy ending, which is the best kind of all.